Very first one I want to talk about with that of your kind of more linear / main missions, I'll refer to linear as more main missions just to help separate the two, right? Because this is the difference here. When you talk about something like linear missions, you're primarily talking about linear game, whether that be more of, say, Last of Us 2 compared to something like Assassin's Creed. However, what we're all seeing now is more and more games are adding more open world elements, even if they don't necessarily have a grand open world like, say, the previous example of Assassin's Creed, but they have more hub worlds when you think about Deus Ex Mankind Divided, Dishonored franchise, Last of Us 2 and Gears of War 5 and God of War. They're not necessarily open world games. However, they are incorporating more elements, whether that be through side quests, whether that be through kind of more lore building stories that you find. The spaces that you encounter are overall bigger in certain sections and encourage more free roaming than the more traditional move from point A to B and there's nothing along the way. Shall we say, you've more got your blinders on as if you were a horse. And as we're seeing, that's changing more and more. As I mentioned, Naughty Dog are experimenting this more day one in Last of Us Part 2. When you think about what they did with Lost Legacy and Uncharted, latest God of War has a lot more of those examples. So as I said, it's becoming more and more relevant to the industry and applying these kind of methods to it. So yes, that's why I'll refer to them as more main missions, as your main missions are constantly pulling the player and progressing the player through the overall story and the ultimate goal of finishing the game, right? So let's go through the first one in terms of shape. Now, your main missions will be much more of corridor arena. So there will be moments, I'll mention a little bit later about the overall flow of combat and the direction it pulls compared to the two. But what you'll notice is no matter what, there'll always be these kind of more corridor shapes to it. When I talk about that, I don't mean necessarily the build in the actual architecture of the level, as you can find that in open world spaces. But when you're playing through the main mission, you're going to be exploring through more corridors than, say, that of actually an open world level itself. So it's these kind of elements here. That's one of the big differences, is that there'll be less exploring, that's the best way to put it, less exploration. You will be constantly moving in a direction. You will be going from A to B all the way. Now, in open world, you're kind of encouraged to explore right off the bat, right? So you'll have different elements kind of pushing you to different open world events. And what you'll find is it's not just in the shape where I mentioned it was corridor arena. In the open world, it's more just here is arena. This is kind of either in a fishbowl shape, a more circular shape. These are kind of limited in space. They are, for example, 1/10. I can't give an actual statistic. It tends to be more of that. The shape, the size, all of that is minuscule versus that of, say, in your more main missions itself, which is also another really important fact. Because with the fact that there are less shapes, shall we say, involved in terms of spacing, you'll tend to find that because of this, that you have more entrances and exits within your overall space too. And what I mean by that is in your open world spaces, which is what I go back to what I mentioned earlier, which is the 360 approach. When you're designing this, you should design with the player in mind that they can enter these spaces from any direction / angle. Now, obviously, when we say this, we don't mean a literal 360 because you need to use walls to block off for line of sight reductions, or you want to funnel the player into these types of entrances. But you should be looking roughly minimum of 3. Again, there is some wiggle room depending on the situation. If you're in a corner of your open world, then yes, maybe only 2 or 1 might apply for this event. But overall, you should be looking for more and more entrances. And with that said, this is where one of the harder choices / design decision need to be made, because you need to think of when the player approaches this space through one of the entrances, how do you establish the overall view to make sense to the player so they get a grasp of what is happening in this event, whether it be through narrative or your objective and goals. So splitting off back to main missions, it's a lot more handcrafted in the sense, not that, we're not relying on you as level designers to build it, more in the sense of you can kind of control a lot more of what is being revealed when it's being revealed to the player within your more main missions. because you just have one direction to worry about, one spot where you know the player has to come through here. They must enter this section in order for them to progress. You know that they can't move here, so you get a lot more chance to craft that space, to funnel the vision, to move elements left and right, to draw the eye, or push the player in a certain direction, highlight their goals. So that's one of the biggest differences. So the two that we've already said is the shapes in terms of length and size, but also entry